My name is Michael Dickman Muldoon. Not a lot of people know that. But what a lot of people would know is that it is a personal privilege and a public honor to get to introduce to you Paul Muldoon. Paul Muldoon and his newest collection, Howdie-Skelp. Paul would remind you, and in fact may remind you, despite what I'm about to say, that a Howdie-Skelp is the slap a midwife gives a newborn to get the oxygen flowing. A slap in the face. It is meant not just to kickstart a breath or two, but to welcome the new being into a world they may not have chosen for themselves. Quite possibly a world of plagues and midges, the troubles, and one of these days, a unique coronavirus. A bracing welcome for a bracing world. I don't remember my own Howdie-Skelp, as my identical twin brother and I were breech and transverse. For those of you at home, it looks like this. And it was the 1970s. And in the 1970s that I'm from, if you blinked, you got a C-section with nary a midwife around. I do seem to remember that the doctor smoked cigarettes, the same cigarettes as my mother, Carols or Players or Virginia Slims. I did receive a Howdie-Skelp or two later in life, often enough from the kind nuns at All Saints or Christ the King or Our Lady of Sorrows, multiple sorrows. Paul Muldoon's poems themselves are a kind of Howdie-Skelp, a shock and a welcome, an invitation to come in from the mundane, from the patronizing, from agitprop, from the usual, into something that is as bracing as the world can be and as fierce. I never know what will happen next in a Muldoon poem. I never know where I might be headed. I cannot express to you enough how rare that is in contemporary art. It is high wire work and is interesting to me as dark matter or photosynthesis or the inner lives of a cow moose or a chipmunk, or the aforementioned plagues and midges. Won't you please help me welcome your midwife and mine, Paul Muldoon.
Oh, I took your book away. I put it there. Sorry.
It's okay. What a delight to be here. Thank you so much for coming out this evening, and indeed for staying in. Hi to everyone online, but a particular thank you to those here in person. I often wonder what we said about being present in the world before we came upon the phrase in person. We probably didn't think about it at all. Where do we begin? There's a poem called A Ruin. It's set in Northern Ireland, and it's about a building that I've been driving by for probably, what do I say, at least 60 years. And so I'll say no more about it than that. A ruin. It might have been a grist mill, a dilapidated granary or grange. I first drove by some 60 years ago, and with my little eye espied through a doorframe the tousled ferns and red-haired dockins, kids my own age, sent out to play in the snow. Their snowballs so specific in the sprawl. Windowless now, roofless, tucked under the first sheltering hill of a range that ran all the way to Mexico, a country into which we still hope to ride hell for leather, still hoped to adjourn after the stick-up. This ruin betokens not only the slow-mo mowing of a meadow for a shopping mall, but the fate that would befall the many tagged and re-tagged over those 60 years. The landscape is so marked by change, the bungled peace process, the shoddy bungalows, the wind farms taking us in their stride. So marked by all the turns things have indeed taken. For kids now summoned back from playing in the snow. The nettles almost as tall as its dividing wall. A ruin seems the only thing intact. Deep. Deep. You know, this one's called The Banisters, and it began with an image of a repurposed banister. As many of you will know, during the Second World War, and indeed the First World War, particularly the Second World War, there was a repurposing of aspects of the household for the war effort. So that if you look around the streetscapes of many British and United Kingdom towns, you'll know that many of the railings have been cut down, particularly in the Second World War. I discovered this because it was only in the Second World War that there was the availability of oxyacetylene. Prior to that, various items that were repurposed, including, of course, the banisters in households that were used to make rifle butts. So it's with that image that the poem began. The banisters are ornamental gates and railings that were melted down for rifle barrels, have gained some sort of posthumous renown by unambiguously drawing a line in the sand. The gates and railings are finally taking a firm stand and even more emphatically bringing things to a close. The exit wound is their approximation of a rose or a geranium under gauze on the windowsill. Gangrene, the green and gold of the first full-blown daffodil. Also rendered, so it would even more tellingly rend, was lead stripped from the gutters and flashing. For lead will bend along a spine as it did along a walnut ridge post. What was once an outer sanctum is now the innermost. Shouldered as rifle stocks, after a mere 3 weeks of drill, the banisters are gradually taking another hill. Seems odd to read that poem today. In the yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. But I realized halfway through, just well, I was hearing from Michael there how, you know, how many of us are interested in poems that are troubling at some level, and you come out the other end of them not quite the same person you went in, which is an article of faith for many of us. But somehow I was, my heart, and I'm sure all our hearts go out to the people of, this night in particular, the people of Ukraine and what they have to put up with. So anyway, maybe something a bit lighter. Oh, the chipmunk was mentioned. Ain't that God's own truth? Just one more flame-streaked roadster, fresh from the spray booth. And that was it. It has the virtue of being short. It's perhaps its only virtue. So let me just read the poem from which the title of this book comes, or in which it appears. And alas, it's another poem having to do with a violent image. It's set on the outskirts of Thessaloniki, or Salonika, as we know in Ireland. Thessaloniki. And I was there a couple of years ago, I guess maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, and witnessed the most horrific road crash. And I'm going to trouble you with it, if I may. Salonika. That young woman's body, sprawled by the side of the road, looked as if it had been thrown clear. Like a burden, her car desperately needed to offload. The car itself was pretty much a write-off, a cairn of chrome and windshield glass, dating back to the Romans, or at least the Romanovs. As she flew through the air, her dress must have ridden halfway up her back, leaving her buttocks bare. Another driver had come to a stop and was already on the phone with the emergency services or the cops. I very much doubt we'd have been of the slightest help had we pulled over on our way to the airport to give her what? A Howdie-Skelp? In the days when we still welcomed someone into the world, we wouldn't have thought it strange that a collet be lightly knurled. In the archaeological museum, there's at least one artifact for which the use is no longer known. We approach it, therefore, with a modicum of tact. That young woman's body, sprawled by the side of the road, represented yet another episode around which we would do our best to steer. Another driver had come to a stop and was picking his way over the pre-dawn blacktop to where she lay, 3/4 prone. I very much doubt would have been of the slightest help. If the ambulance we meet could barely manage a yelp, anything we might have done would have been a falling short. As she flew through the air after her car had hit a pole, she may have felt a pang of despair to think her grasp on things had now gone slack. The car itself was pretty much a write-off. Be it a circlet for a quaff or a hoop through which a soul might pass in the days when we still welcomed someone into the world, or a ferrule from a javelin hurled beyond our range. In the archaeological museum, there's at least one artifact from a past we simply cannot reenact. It may be ivory, it may be deer bone. That young woman's body, sprawled by the side of the road, looked as if it had been thrown clear. As she flew through the air, her skirt had ridden halfway up her back. The car itself was pretty much a write-off. A cairn of chrome and windshield glass. Another driver had come to a stop and was already on the phone. So I very much doubt would have been of the slightest help that we pulled over on our way to the airport. In the days when we still welcomed someone into the world, we wouldn't have thought it strange. In the archaeological museum, there's at least one artifact for which the use is no longer known. All right. Any thoughts, observations? You know, there will be a little Q&A. I think some people online might have some questions or comments, complaints. Will be lodged with management.
What's a current?
Sir?
What's a current?
What's a
Current. Current.
C-U?
I don't know how to spell it.
Oh, a
You said
cairn.
it.
Oh, I beg your pardon. That's my Irish accent. That's
I
so a cairn, C-A-I-R-N, is
Oh, like a pile of stuff.
pile of stones. That's right. Cairn. It's one of those words that is entered. They're one of the number of Irish words that have entered English. Cairn, a pile of stones. Yes.
Any regrets in that poem for not stopping?
Yes, I mean, I think that's why I wrote it.
Yeah.
I think that's why I wrote it. It was just a horrendous experience. And, you know, I mean, one always wonders, what could one do? What can one do to help, you know?
Did she get any help?
You know, I think she was dead.
But where is this supposed to have taken place?
Just outside Thessaloniki.
Where is that?
That is in Macedonia.
Oh,
Salonika. Any of you familiar with it, or any of you been to it perhaps? Thessaloniki. Salonika.
Was it pre-seatbelt times?
No, it was a couple of years ago.
Okay.
It was only a couple of years ago. Yeah, it was horrendous.
wow.
So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think many of us write poems and indeed novels and short stories, is to try to figure things out, you know, insofar as one can, insofar as it's possible. That particular, you notice, even I noticed, some repetitions in it. It's based on a form called the trilet, or trile, pronounced in different manners depending on where one is pronouncing it, insofar as anyone much pronounces it at all. There's a particular form that relies on a very insistent kind of repetition. I mean, so many of those great received forms rely on that. This particular one, I took, I think, 4 or 5 of them and intercut them. So that's basically what's happening on the technical front, for those of you who might be interested.
A friend of mine teaches creative writing at Rutgers.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, she teaches, yeah, she writes books,
yes,
yeah, so.
and does she teach some of those traditional forms?
I don't know, I think she does,
Uh-huh. A lot of people do, it can be quite useful.
yeah.
I don't know if anyone online can hear these questions.
Yeah.
You know, this is a short poem. Oh, another reason for relief. It's actually like many Irish poems from the 9th century. There was quite a lot of activity in the 9th century. And if it wasn't only the writing down of poems, the composition of poems, it was certainly some form of writing them down, usually by monks, usually by anonymous monks. And this is quite a famous poem about a storm at sea. And however frightening that may be, it has one upside. Because of the high waves and high winds, there's a very strong chance that the Vikings will not be on the sea that night, right? So anonymous, the Vikings. It's keen as a sword's edge, the wind tonight. The sea men, that's M-A-N-E, men, an unruly shock of white. It means a raiding party of the Norse would almost certainly be blown off course. The fly. Surrounded as he is by the blood spatter from the cut and thrust over an idea to which he was but briefly wed, the fly is washing his hands of the matter till the smoke clears. A wild catter on a rig still lumbering across the North Sea's bed, surrounded as he is by the blood spatter and spot of crude, he remembers only a scatter of crudité, heavy hors d'oeuvre, glasses, remembers seeing red. The fly is washing his hands of the matter, now a meal in an upper room, has once again served to shatter his illusions. Overcome by the high hum of the dead, surrounded as he is by the blood spatter from the cruets of oil and vinegar, the fly is tempted to spray attar of roses on the aforesaid fly, washing his hands of the matter. If only because the internet chatter points to a city about to cede to the forces of Ethelred, surrounded as it is. By the blood spatter you shall know them, as you shall know a satyr by its horse's ears and tail. Instead of washing his hands of the matter, the fly might embrace an earth that is irredeemably in tatters, a banquet of slivers and shreds, surrounded as it is by the interplanetary blood spatter, might heed the pitter-patter of unborn fly feet on the stair tread. But the fly is washing his hands of the matter, even as he contemplates a platter complete with its severed head, now the centerpiece of the spread. Surrounded as he is by the blood spatter, the fly is washing his hands of the matter. Another of those insistent, crazy verse forms. So, a little love poem? No? Oh, I said yes or no. No, I think there's a strong argument against it there. How are you tonight? Okay, well, you know, let's see. The sheet. Imagine, you know, a city in Europe, village in Europe, a village square, maybe a little bit like Palmer's, Square. Only a little bit, a square, but somewhat like Palmer Square. The sun is shining, the sun is going down, perhaps, by this stage. And a couple of people are having a delicious dinner outside. Yeah, it is Palmer Square. The sheet. We were sitting in a village square not so very much broader than the bridal suite that overlooked it. The suite where we'd spend at least part of that afternoon extending our modest repertoire of love forays and love feats. Now we made do with playing footsie at a cafe table while pondering fettuccine with sage. Plein air or en plein air? You checked your iPhone. A culinary herb native to southern Europe and the Mediterranean, once thought to grow best in households where the wife is dominant. Even though the supporting evidence was far from scant, this was a theory I must put to rest. Given the frantic smoothing out of air by the man and two young boys hoisting a sheet through what was irreparably twilight. A grandfather, and you surmised, his two grandsons were about to run a test on the projector that had only recently become a prominent feature of our lives. It looked very much as if the eggplant was introduced to the West by Alexander the Great. As to whether normal wear and tear could have accounted for the rip in your Himalayan wrap itself, a shade of aubergine in a blend of wool and wire, the jury was still out. Acquainted though we'd been with the fact cellulose nitrate is notoriously unstable, we were nonetheless taken unawares when the reel of film began to disintegrate, even as images of what looked like some of our earlier exploits were thrown up on the screen. Enough of that. Any thoughts, queries, concerns?
Concerns are behind the scenes.
Yeah, they're real concerns. They're real concerns. Let's see. You mentioned the moose, Michael, I believe?
I did.
Cow moose. You know, only a person with too much nerve imagines that they're going to get away with writing a poem about a moose. You know, it's kind of been done, and it's something. You know, though nothing is off limits, it has been done so well that one hesitates from going into that territory at all. But my argument is that the moose came into my territory actually quite often. We used to spend a lot of time up near Ripton, Vermont, the Breadloaf School of English, and there were mooses. There were moose galore. You could, on certain evenings, actually, one could go and park alongside a moose. Yeah, Michael Wood. Am I right, or is that Michael? Yeah. One could actually park alongside a moose and sort of take the evening air with them. Anyway, so this is a cow moose, Route 125, Ripton, Vermont. A throwback to 1966. What with the Vidal Sassoon bob cut fringe, trademarked by Mary Quant, and her coming into her own only at dusk to binge on water lilies in a sunken discotheque. Though you may have her pegged as a wuss, she has scant regard for the predations of bear or coy dog, ranging out across the muskeg to strip a dozen willow trees of their pain-killing bark and shoots. Some nights she's got up in hot pants, others a kind of knitted mohair mini dress, set off by platform boots.
That's the end of the boots.
You know, there is a tendency for some of these poems, it's been remarked upon, to stop rather than end. Yeah, that was it. That was the boots. You know, sorry about that. Little bit of a change of address. Maybe I'll read this one, and then if there are any more questions or comments, whatever, or Michael, do you have any thoughts? So this is called the Dirty Protest, which refers to the protest that was launched by prisoners in the Maze prison in Northern Ireland, the H blocks, where prisoners were held and were demanding political status and not receiving it, and in retaliation and by way of making launching a complaint about that, they often smeared the walls of their cells with their excrement, and that's why it was called the Dirty Protest. One of the reasons why it was called that. So, for what it's worth, and it's not really worth anything, this is a sestina of sorts, kind of slightly crazy sestina, the Dirty Protest. Though Wergild and Eric may both refer to the concept of a blood price, there are concepts that float free of any word. Take Peter Barden's, the former keyboardist for Them, showing up on Wavelength in 1978. Is there a term for that? Or a farmer of pecans enjoying a higher status than a peanut farmer. If allegations of assault were made against officers in the RUC, very rarely were said officers subject to investigation. In the matter of Alan Price, and only Alan Price, receiving songwriting credits for The House of the Rising Sun, that special status reflects the alphabet. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Bhagwan. When I first read Langston Hughes's theme for English B, I had some sense of the concept of being under a thumb. Chiefly from my encounters with UDR officers who were former B specials. The Baltimore Beacon was built in the light of 1798. Although United Ireland was a pearl of great price, those who cherished that idea were often, in a word, terrorists. In early Irish society, chieftains and other men of status were buried standing up, like their own statues, their faces set against their enemies. By 1978, Moondance was an anthem Van Morrison played twice in one night in the Bottom Line. Their name's a byword for militant republicanism to the officers in Armagh jail. The sisters, Dolores and Marion Price, were trying to keep their noses clean. The Israeli Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, had signed another peace treaty with the Pigan around the time Earl Old Person was granted the honorary status of Chief of the Blackfeet, all for the price of a blanket. That arrhythmia may be cured by a self-administered chest thump is well attested by officers of all stripes. On that you have not only their word, but Jimmy Carter's. As far back as 1976, the IRA leaders in the Maze had sent word to the Army Consul asking them to begin a campaign of assassinating prison officers. The idea was that since the prisoners were prepared to die for political status, those who tried to take it away from them must be prepared to pay the same price. Who would have guessed that every god, pagan or Christian, has its price? Or that an Irish king might keep as a status symbol a Viking sword? Who would have guessed that lithium would be such a money spinner for Pfizer? This is the kind of poem that your parents warned you against. Any thoughts? Yes, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I should not say this, but
I'm just gonna come to you so that anyone online can hear the question, otherwise.
I should not say this, but.
You cannot say it?
The moment that you described what you were about to read, I said, I didn't know anyone could elevate January 6th. You did, with the decorations, you did. And I mean that in a good way. It's the only way one could comment on that in a good way. Okay? You described the dirt. And I knew I shouldn't have done this.
Good.
Still in a good way.
Okay.
Nobody has ever been able to say anything even a little bit good about a year ago, but you have.
Yes, well, it is a fact that poems, may certainly be, their meaning, their resonance changes from moment to moment. They do mean slightly different things, or they've slightly different, slightly different weights are attached to them from moment to moment. So while that poem is not directly related to January 6th, I mean, it may be that you see something in there that connects with it.
I guess I'll admit I'm confused a little bit on that one. So is that a very broad worldview, not specific to Ireland, obviously, but ending with Pfizer and going through a lot of machinations?
Yeah, well, Pfizer takes a worldview, and certainly a number of these poems reflect my experience in the world, which is, of course, to have come from Northern Ireland, but to have lived here for 35 years. So their range of reference is quite broad. I mean, perhaps problematically so in some instances. We've certainly been taught that unity of tone and subject matter and all those other ideas, time, are desirabilities. But often my poems range over different territories, different time zones, different geographical spaces, for better or worse, because that, again, for better or worse, is part of the back of my head. You know, is that what you're getting at, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that kind of answers the query that, you know, it does go all over the place. That's the
Yes.
purpose. That's okay.
Yes, I mean, certainly, one of the things that, as you know, that the 20th century and certainly the 21st century doesn't seem to be shaping up very differently, is it has to do with the poem, among many other art forms, reflecting fracture and reflecting, a lack of a single world view. So that's certainly the case with them.
I see a hand over there.
Thank you. For you, what makes a poet?
What makes a poet? Well, thank you so much for that question. A poet, and of course, when people say that, generally what that means is, oh, I have to think about that. That's how it translates. What a poet is a person who is involved in making things in the world. That's what the word means, as you know, from its Greek root. A maker of things, an engineer, a woodworker, a carpenter, someone who is in the construction business. That's one thing, right? That's one component. And that, of course, translates in English, in the English tradition, to the term maker, used of more often than not of Scottish poets. A maker, a maker. And then there's this other word, I find this useful, just to try to answer your question. The word I find also useful is another term for a poet, which is a troubadour. And the troubadour is in trovatore, right? Someone who finds things, someone who stumbles upon things, someone who doesn't know what they're doing, right? So there's the person who knows what they're doing, the maker, and the troubadour who has absolutely no idea what they're doing. So the poet, most interesting poets combine those two elements. You have to be able, there's a certain amount of craft involved in it, we sometimes shy away from that idea, but for very good reasons. It's very hard to be that kind of craftsperson. But more importantly, and perhaps even more difficult, is, I've talked to my students about this, even more difficult is to be completely innocent, open, ignorant before the world, and to not know what one's doing. So that is the key. It's been described by a number of poets, Wordsworth, Keats most memorably, and negative capability, right? Of being able to go by uncertainty through the world. Uncertainty being the important thing. So, and then to be essentially a vehicle for whatever the poem wants to do. So that's what I think a poet does. Basically a maker of objects in the world. Other things may happen coincidentally, right? And there may be some revelations about the world. Ideally, yes.
What a beautiful answer, the maker and the one who finds. And shall we maybe close with that and leave some time if you want to get your book personalized. Most of the copies back there are already signed. Paul, maybe I'll keep you up here after we thank you
Of course.
in a chair, and then you can come and bring your book to Paul.
Thank you.
Paul, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here in this great bookstore. Michael Dickman, thank you so much for your very kind introduction. Thank you so much for coming out. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you.